Tātou, and welcome to what was going to be a fabulous kōrero this morning. I can only apologise for the slight technical hitches that we've had, and we don't currently have one of our panellists, Lauren, with us, and we hope that she will join us very shortly. Just before we start, I introduce our wonderful wahine that we have with us. I'm just going to ask Jilly to open for us with a karakia. Jilly.
Okay. Whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ane te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti he mauri ora.
Kia ora, Jilly. Welcome to It Takes a Village, how reading and storytelling sets your whānau up for success. Let me introduce our wonderful panellists for this morning. Linda Vagana. So Linda is the General Manager of Duffy Books in Homes, as well as an international netball coach and a former representative player for New Zealand. Linda is well known for nurturing players on the court at both the community, country and international level. But it's in the classroom that Linda has spent the last 15 years, inspiring a love of reading in homes across Aotearoa and the Pacific. The philosophy behind Duffy Books in Homes is simple: to break the cycle of booklessness, and we look forward to speaking with Linda this morning. Kia ora, Linda. And Jilly Tyler. Jilly is the Chief Executive of Talking Matters. Jilly is driven to great outcomes for children and families and has the privilege of guiding Talking Matters in improving life outcomes through rich early language development. Talking Matters strives for all children in Aotearoa to thrive as confident, competent and creative communicators. Jilly brings extensive experience in early childhood education and community development, encompassing teaching, professional development and educational management. Welcome, Jilly. And when Lauren joins us, Lauren is our Children and Youth Practice Lead for Auckland Libraries, and I'll introduce you to her when she is able to join us a little later in the piece. So I'm just going to, we're going to kick off with this morning. We've got about 40 minutes. We had hoped for 45 with some questions. We'll just make time work as we can this morning. And we're going to kick off with a little bit about the science. And Jilly, if I could come to you, we know that oral language is the first critical step to reading and writing, but I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the theory and the science that is behind that, please.
Yeah, well, at Talking Matters, we have a particular focus on the first 1,000 days, and we talk about the importance of early oral language development and language-rich environments right from the start, from that moment that baby is born, or even before that baby is learning and growing, and through talk and through interactions, that builds the brain architecture for that baby and that child to grow and go on to have success. And so we really want everyone to understand how important it is to begin talking and to start interacting with your baby through touch, hugging, holding, laughing, all of those things that we naturally think about. But I guess what we're wanting people to understand is by doing that they are building that baby's brain architecture for doing better, for growing and developing for later on. It really is the beginning of literacy. And I guess we're here today thinking about the library and thinking about books, and books are a really good way to start talking and with your baby.
That's great. You talk there about a language-rich environment. What does that look like in practice? What does that look like in our homes every day?
Well, it's not only about language, it's about the images, the artifacts that you have in your home. It's about the experiences that you might have with your baby. When you're going out in the car and you're talking with your baby or your children, the whole family's in the car talking and chatting and singing. It's about the songs. It's about your history as a family. It's about the sounds, the music, the whole the whole environment that your baby is in can be a language-rich environment. Yeah. And we want people to understand, I guess, that it isn't just about talk. It is also about the imagery that is in your home, or it's when you're at the marae and you're looking at carvings and the stories that those stories tell. That's also part of that language-rich environment. It's about being in nature and what those trees might feel like and be like. So it's really thinking about the languages and the sounds and the imagery that you get through, I guess, through sharing experiences. That's how a language-rich environment is developed for that child. Yeah.
So you don't need to have specific tools and resources at hand. They're all around you anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't cost much to talk. And you don't have to do much. You just really have to connect with your baby. By starting with that strong connection with your baby and having the opportunity for that baby to look and share and go backwards and forwards with your baby in the way you talk with her or him, that's going to be the start of the language-rich environment. And then just playing outside and using words to describe what you're doing when you're outside. It's things like when you're about to chop up the potatoes for dinner, just talking about, I'm chopping potatoes for dinner. That is creating the language environment that we think that where children will thrive and grow. Yeah.
Great. And Linda, Duffy's all about having books around in the environment as well. How do books contribute to that language-rich environment for children?
I love how Jilly expressed, the rich language and how important that is in our environment, and the engagement and having the tools to be able to create and instigate that language. It brings me back to a life where books weren't very popular in my home because firstly, Mum and Dad didn't buy them. But what I do love is the fact that Duffy is about making books visible. How do we create an opportunity for a parent to pick up a book? And when you're talking about rich language there, Jilly, it is really important to understand too that our whānau, books can be placed anywhere. How do we increase the value of what a book is? And just in the weekend, I had some nieces and nephews over. The language started with just giving them a little table knife to help me cut some mushrooms, and after that, they saw some books right next to the bedside because they were running around messing up my room as kids do. But books are everywhere in our home, whether it be in the lounge, and it's really important to have books in the places, to put them in the places where the kids are, as opposed to sometimes in my home the books are put up really nicely in the shelves, and often they're not accessible to our kids. But if we create an environment where books are anywhere where our kids could be, whether it's in the foyer of our churches, it's in the entranceway of our marae, it's in the sports field, I think there is always an opportunity to create language around the books. And it's not about opening them up and reading, because I know we're time poor too, as we're always rushing from one place to another, but it could be just opening the book and talking about the pictures, what's in there. And I think for Duffy Books and Homes, it's ensuring that we are enhancing the environments that our children are in by making books visible, and it's cool to have them there. When they're visible, it means that there's a value that we're placing on these books, and kids will continue to see that with their own children.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that integration of books into every part of life. So if you're chopping the potatoes that Jilly was talking about, actually there's books around which have recipes, and they have grandma's recipe in it, that you can just do that reading in everyday life. And valuing those stories that are in there. But what I'm also hearing is, I'm also hearing it doesn't need to be in books. It's also about those stories and as well that come alongside the books as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because sometimes just sharing a family photograph and talking about who's in who's in that photograph and what was happening that day, and just that creates the idea of a story. That's a simple story that any family can do. Most families have a photograph on the wall, and the opportunity to talk about that and tell a story about that particular picture is the beginning of storytelling in a family. Yeah.
And I guess part of that is the role modelling, which Linda, your Duffy Books in schools and books in homes is really strong on those role models, both within the whānau but also in other places. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about why role models are so important and having people role modelling that reading and the use of storytelling.
I talked and sort of spoke about something like similar to this yesterday to an education team, and it's really important that the kids see what they can be in front of them, and the role model program that's part of Duffy Books and Homes. We understand that our schools do amazing jobs in creating literacy and reading plans to get our kids up to the standard that they need to move on. But it's also an opportunity for Duffy to go in there and create every opportunity to ensure that reading is also cool. So as much as it's about putting the icing on the cake with delivering amazing personalities that can go in there and then just do a top-up around ensuring that kids understand that the successes of a lot of our role models who come from all walks of life have not succeeded on their own, that reading was a huge part, an important part of their lives. And it's just expressing that story to our young kids. And if they see that, there's an opportunity to be a fireman, a hairdresser, a sports person, an author, an illustrator, that you need to know how to read. And that's the education piece, but that reading is really cool. We did this because we were able to dive into some books and find the right books that we like to read, and the success comes with that. So role modelling also starts in the home, and we touched on that just a little bit earlier too, that parents seeing the value of books and having them everywhere means that our kids, advance in their education when those books are around the home too.
Yeah, and I think just drawing on that also, I think if if the experience of having a book and being held even right from the start for a very new baby, that feeling of touch and hold and connectedness between either an older brother, an auntie, or a mother or a father, anybody, but that feeling of being connected right from the beginning, and that lovely experience that baby starts to learn, that actually it's a really nice thing reading a book. I'll feel connected to my adults or my family, and it's a time of just enjoyment and enjoying something together, and that starts the journey of loving books, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. And does that start from day one, or do you need to leave it till later?
No, I mean, I think I know people we talk with are surprised when we say, you can start talking to a baby or showing a baby a book really early on in a baby's life. It might start off with stories, in the first few weeks of a newborn baby, that baby is is really feeding and sleeping. But fairly early on, babies will start to be touching and holding things, and you can show pictures of a book. They'll feel it, and you might just open a picture and say, oh, look, there's a bird. And that might be enough for that child to begin with. But, fairly early on, that baby will start to be listening to words and stories. And, yeah, it's never too early to start reading. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. Yeah.
Mm. And I know, Linda, you've talked about having those role models at home, but how do we integrate that across the whole whānau and keep the whānau engaged in reading? Are there some strategies that families can use to do that?
Yeah, it's not only the ones that read that can share. It starts right from, again, making those tools of books available to young kids, because often you've got the adult or the older sibling that could be reading, but it's also making sure that if valuing education is that when Auntie's home has the books in there, when where grandma and grandpa are, that books are readily available in the home. It's all sort of creating opportunities where the kids can actually pick something up and open it. And we find quite often, and I know in my household, that colour is really cool. And when this is all laid out across the dining table, it's inside grandpa's room, not necessarily on the tables, but it's lying on the floor, or there's nothing wrong with the colour sort of lying everywhere. And the opportunity is always, it rises when the kids are running into Papa's room, or they're running into my car and go, oh, these are neat coloured books. So I think when you're starting to engage and get our young people interested in reading, we've got to find too the right topics that they're interested in. I know that at the moment, one of my nieces who is in intermediate loves a Telestar series, which is quite a scary one for me to read myself, but she's really into it, and having those books available too. So finding the genres that our kids are into. Our kids at the moment, I had a book selection meeting. Now this is getting me really excited, but we had a book selection meeting not too long ago, earlier this week, or last week I should say, and there were books there that were about probably some of the actions that we don't like our kids doing, but hey, if this book is about somebody farting, or somebody's, these are the actions that are going to attract some kind of conversation, then let it be, because eventually they'll know how to read, but eventually they'll also be able to carry on from there and read books that we hope they would like to read further their education. So while
I remember
it's hot,
myself having
my message,
yeah.
while it's hot, just give it to them.
Yeah, I remember myself having a book like that and just thinking it was the best book that you could, because it was somehow slightly taboo, but
Right.
just hilarious. So yeah, great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. For some families, I know introducing books in their heritage language is a real inspiration, even for parents when this is not their first language themselves. Jilly, I know you've had some experience in this space. I wonder if you could just talk to how parents can address that.
I mean, I think when babies are born, there's a lot of hope, and people are really wanting their children to connect to their heritage language, and some families may not have it. And but there are books. One of the really good ways for whānau to start to introduce language that's other than the language that's they know is through books. And for example, I just went down to the library the other day to get some books for this session, and there's some really lovely books that are bilingual books. This one's really nice. It's for me, if I was reading to my Māori nephew, for example, I don't speak Māori, but I can introduce Māori words to him because it's in the main language is Reo Māori, but then it's translated, and I could either choose not to use the English words or just the Māori words. And also I'm learning I'm learning language myself, and for many families this is the beginning of them learning Māori or Samoan or whatever the language is that they want to begin to learn, that they've lost that language. They do it through their children. So it's a really great opportunity. Actually, I was really impressed with the number of books, bilingual books that were available at the library. This is just one, but they were really cool. And I've learnt quite a lot already by reading it this morning, in preparation for this. Yeah, it's a really good opportunity to introduce new words and learn new reo, for example.
And I know if Lauren was here, she would be talking about the multilingual resources that are available at libraries and how libraries are really building those to support families from all with all sorts of languages to actually
Yeah, I mean,
to use
the
those
books.
resources.
Yeah, sorry. But I found, there's the amount of books that were totally in Reo Māori was incredible. It was a vast array, and I'd really urge people to go down and have a look because they're really exciting. They're expensive books, but you can do it there.
Yeah. And Linda, just sort of moving on to sort of preparing for school. So, we've talked about those first 1,000 days and, those early years. But, one of the things that we as parents are very keen to do is ensure that when our children go to school that they're ready. And I know schools are really keen for our children when they turn up at school to be really ready. I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about how those early experiences contribute to children being set up for school and how the different experiences actually contribute. Linda, if I could come to you first on that one.
Yeah, look, Duffy are in 520 schools, primary schools across the country at the moment. And we recognise that to have our new entrants entering school and having a relationship with a book, that this is sometimes not happening in a lot of our communities and a lot of the homes in our Duffy communities. And so we thought, well, hang on a minute, what can we do to ensure that when our kids are coming in, new entrants coming into school, that they have some tools or have seen or have been part of having books coming into their homes. So we decided to launch the Early Childhood Duffy Ready for Reading program, and also, having the tools that will support that, whether they be bookmarks, book bags, and having these available for our kids so that they're nice and bright. They want to know what they are, and they're for books only to go into these bags. But we also recognise that whānau, if they're going to have a lot of time in the lives of our kids, it's not so much primary school. They start to leave the kids to go, as they get older, as they and the parents aren't really supporting them to school, but they're a lot more engaged at early childhood level. So when we introduced the ECE program into our early childhood centres, the number of parents that were actually contributing to the ordering of the books was a huge surprise, in fact. And we also saw that if we made books that were in different languages, whether it be bilingual te reo titles, bilingual Pasifika titles, that they're not necessarily the books that our kids would naturally run to, but because we had whānau who were sometimes where English is a second language in their homes, they were picking up these bilingual titles and seeing that this is an opportunity for them to read something that they're familiar with. So I think familiarity is really important, and I want to pick up too from what Jilly said earlier around ensuring that we've got the right tools around for our young kids to be engaged. We've found that through our ECE that there's so much more opportunity to do more than just books, and partnering with the various groups that we can, so that we can do a little bit more than just the books. And the data's out there. I think, Jilly, we need to do a little bit more work together, whether it be more books into, the opportunities that you have with your whānau.
Thank you.
And just staying with the languages piece, I've had a question here, Linda, which I think I'll address to you if I can while we're talking about this. We've had somebody ask saying that we're speaking two languages at home, and they're worried about talking and reading in two languages, and that might confuse their children. I just wonder what's your thinking on that?
That just takes me right back to being preschooler, probably. Yeah, preschooler. English was a second language in my home. And the Bible was probably the first book that came across my lap to learn the alphabet. And so going into school, knowing the Samoan alphabet helped me with my reading because I knew how all the sounds and the look of letters were. But looking at our communities and some of our whānau now, a lot of our parents are speaking English in the home. So there's a lot of really cool illustrated and written books by Pasifika people themselves, whether they be in Samoan or Tongan, te reo. And there's some great books there that are mashing up words so that we could use the nouns of, say, Samoan, because we tend to know the nouns first before in that particular language, and these words are all mashed up in these books, and you can not only learn as a child, but then the adult is also learning their own language, and I think it's really cool. We've got some great authors out there, and I'd love to put some of them up on this talk if the parents are wanting to know some of those authors.
That would be great. And if there's any...
I just want to jump in there because from a brain science perspective, the more languages a child learns, the more neural pathways they're developing. And it might take a little bit more time for that child to speak one or the other language, or if it's 3 languages they're learning, they're being exposed to. But ultimately, it'll be better for them to do both. And they've got the capacity, very young children have got the capacity to grow in 2 or 3 languages really easily. So just don't stop and don't limit children at all.
Yeah.
The more the better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love that thought of mashing things up as well.
Yeah.
And Jilly, just going back, just as we sort of transition into schools, just wondering sort of what it is that you would advise parents to be doing as their children go into those, those slightly older early childhood and it transitions to schools.
Sure.
How do we develop that language at that point?
I think right from the start, I'll just go back to I can't emphasize enough the importance of introducing interesting and exciting language and words right from the start. The more children hear words over and over again, the more that will enable them to, when they're starting to read, they will they'll be able to understand what those words mean. So don't limit your language. You don't have to make things simple for young children. The more they hear a word or a variety of words, the more that will help them later on as they read and write. So we talk about using juicy words, like big descriptive words. If we talk about the word hot, we might think of, we might say scolding instead of hot, or scorching instead of hot, just so that children get to experience a variety of words and begin to love and enjoy language. Yeah.
And that actually brings us to another question that we've got here, Jilly, which I'll ask you, is that the books that my children choose are too difficult. They don't understand them. Should I be sticking to simpler books?
So those, look, I when I went to the library, I'm just going to stand up and get a book. I found a book at the library, and because I thought it would be a nice book to choose. But actually, when I opened it, there were, for very little children, I thought, oh, this language, this is too much. But what I would do with the books is just, get them to choose the books that attract them, but just talk about the pictures. You don't have to do all the words. You don't have to do the whole story. Maybe, and actually your child might actually just want to focus on one page. That's cool. You don't have to start from beginning to end. You can just find a picture and point to the pictures and talk about what's there and maybe use some of the words. In fact, you can just make up the story if you can't be bothered reading the whole thing as well. Because, sometimes it might be a bit boring for you. Just have fun with the book and play with the words. Don't worry about what it is. Yeah. That's my advice.
Interaction. That's great advice. It reminds me of Dad used to be really good with bringing in I think he had a subscription to National Geographic books, and what I loved about them when the magazines arrived was just all the colour on the covers of these books, and I'd often get them to read them to me, but little did I know, and my grandmother did this too, little did I know is that they were making up stories, but it got me so engaged into, I guess they were reading a paragraph from it. But once it got too long, I think my interest sort of left. But then I created it. It instills thought, but then you start creating your own. It opens up that world of imagination where you can create your own story from it. So I do love that, Jilly. I see that happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it's okay to veer away from the book. It's okay for the children to make up their stories and just go where they want to. Is that what we're saying?
That's how a lot of our authors. That's how a lot of our amazing authors create their stories.
Start making things up.
They jot down those notes, and before you know it, you've got Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I have another question here, which I'll put to both of you. How often should I be reading with my children? Jilly?
I mean, there's no rules actually, but I know parenting can sometimes be hard, and so creating routines around bedtime is a good time to read. It might only be once a day, but then for 5 minutes, and that's all you've got time for. But 5 to 10 minutes a day is enough. As long as you're both having fun and it's a nice time for everyone and you're not stressed. Yeah, I would say that would be my advice. Not about how much, but just so that you're having a nice time as well. Yeah.
Great. And I guess, Linda, you were saying just making books available.
Yeah, just having them available. But I think adding on to Jilly is bringing everyone else into the whānau, from the whānau, to take responsibility too. So it's not just on the mums and dads, but it's what you've got normally in a lot of our Pasifika homes, and in my home mostly. I'm inviting myself to all the nieces and nephews' homes. So, make use of the aunties, uncles, older brothers, older sisters, and the like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to sort of come to a close. I just wonder if there's any words of encouragement that both of you would like to give to our parents when they're engaging with their kids, and just what those children are getting from that. Jilly, can I come to you first?
Well, when we ask families that we work closely with families who are wanting to grow their children's language. And when we ask them for advice, they often say the thing they didn't realise was how much fun it is just talking with children and playing games or singing and mucking around. And so I think my advice is try and be silly every now and then. Put aside some time to be silly and have fun with language and words and books or stories. And it could be that when you're walking down to the shop to get something, you make a joke of it. That's the thing that I think most of the families that we talk to say, learning to have fun is the best part about being a parent. And with language, I think that's a really good start.
That's wonderful advice, Jilly. Thank you. And Linda, to you finally.
Yeah, exactly what Jilly said. but also on top of that, I'll add that if you find the opportunity to see what genre the kids are into, and don't mind what they're into, once they're hooked into a particular series, then you're on your way. So if you can find a series that the kids are just taking off with and reading them, then you're on your way. And it's just a matter of making those books available, sending them off to the library, and getting the next episode or the next series that's similar to it. Because I think that's the magic of reading, is when you find and sort of hit that threshold where you've actually gone beyond reading. Because you have to, but you read because you want to.
Cool.
So what I'm hearing is reading and learning is fun, and that's what we need to just focus on as parents, and as ourselves. So, yeah. Well, I'd just like to thank both of you so much for this morning, for that wonderful kōrero and the advice that you've given. We'll provide links to both Talking Matters and Duffy Books and Homes with the recording of this when it's put online. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to touch base with any of us. And I think Inika has also posted a survey, which if listeners could just take a moment just to quickly fill in so that we know what you'd like to hear next time as well, and where we can improve, that would be fantastic. But apologies that we couldn't have Lauren join us this morning, and for the slight technical difficulties at the beginning, but that's always the way. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful 45 minutes, and I thank the two of you so very much. And just before we close, I'll hand back to Jilly just to close us with a karakia, please.
Okay. Well, thank you, Bronwyn, for keeping us going. That was a really great conversation. It's nice to see you again, Linda. And I just want to do a mihi to all those hardworking parents out there that I know, just taking a few minutes each day with your baby, it really is going to make a difference. So just keep at it, and go down to the library if you want to hang out with some books. Okay. Pānui Tatau. Kua mutu a mātua mahi, mō tēnei wā, manakitia mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi.
Kia ora, Jilly. Amen. Ka kite, everybody.